When you reach your late 60s and early 70s, nobody prepares you for how unfamiliar life begins to feel. People warn you about money. They warn you about your blood pressure and your medications and your knees, but very few people sit down and tell you the honest truth about what really changes between 65 and 75. And I want to tell you that truth today because understanding it is the only way to survive it with your dignity and your peace intact. This is not the decade when life becomes impossible. It is the decade when life becomes heavier. Small things, ordinary things, things that never used to cost you a second thought, suddenly ask something from you, a little more energy, a little more courage, a little more patience than you expected to need. And if you do not understand what is happening, you start blaming yourself for changes that are actually happening to nearly everyone your age. So today I want to talk about 6 challenges that arrive quietly in these years. Not to frighten you, quite the opposite. I want you to see them clearly before they take pieces of your life without asking permission. Because once you understand what is happening, you can respond with something better than fear or denial. You can respond with honest awareness. The first challenge is sameness. This one moves in slowly and most people do not notice until it is already settled. One morning you realize you have been driving the same roads for months, eating the same meals, watching the same programs, sitting in the same chair every evening while the days blur together like someone has been making copies of your life and handing them back to you one after another. I went through this myself after I turned 68. I had a coffee shop I liked, same table by the window every Thursday morning, same order, same newspaper, same 20 minutes before driving home, the same way I always drove home. At first it felt comforting, familiar, safe, but slowly I noticed something that unsettled me. My world was getting smaller, and I had not given it permission to do that. My mind was not waking up anymore. I was not curious about things. Days stopped feeling distinct from one another. And here is something important I want you to hear. The brain ages faster when nothing surprises it. People think keeping sharp means doing puzzles and taking supplements. Those things have their place. But what truly keeps the mind alive is novelty. Small surprises, tiny moments where the brain has to pay attention to something it has not seen before. One afternoon I drove 4 streets past my usual turn and found a small garden I had never noticed, maintained by a local church, completely quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat on a bench there for 20 minutes watching pigeons and an old man reading a paperback. Nothing remarkable happened, but when I got home I realized I remembered the whole day clearly. That is what a small interruption does to a mind that has been receiving copies of itself. So now I tell people this. Once a week, do one unfamiliar thing. Nothing dramatic. You do not need to change your life at 69. Walk a different street. Try a restaurant on the other side of town. Read an author you have never heard of. Sit on a different bench in the park. The aging brain does not need excitement nearly as much as it needs interruption. Because when every day looks identical, the mind quietly stops recording your life, and that is a very slow and very quiet way to disappear. The second challenge is the shrinking of your social world. This one is harder to talk about because it feels embarrassing. It does not happen all at once. It happens the way a tide goes out, so gradually you do not notice until the shore is much farther away than you remember it being. First you stop making certain phone calls because you feel tired. Then you decline a few invitations because staying home sounds easier. Then months pass and the phone barely rings and you sit with that silence wondering where everyone went. I have watched this happen to good people, strong people, men and women who spent 40 years surrounded by colleagues and neighbors and family, suddenly sitting alone in the middle of afternoons, not entirely sure how they got there. Here is what nobody explains properly. Often the people did not disappear first. The impulse disappeared first. The desire to reach outward gets softer as we age. That is why loneliness becomes so dangerous after 65. It is not only about being alone, it is about slowly losing the instinct to reconnect. After my wife passed, I had afternoons where I could hear my neighbors talking on their porch and I would think I should go over there. Then a quieter voice would say, "Maybe tomorrow." That small sentence can steal years from a person. Maybe tomorrow becomes 6 months before you realize what happened. Here is what I want you to hear. At this age, you do not need dozens of friends. You do not need a full social calendar. You need regular human contact, small, repeated connections, the neighbor who waves, the woman at the pharmacy who asks how your week was, the barber who remembers what you told him last time. These small interactions matter more than pride allows most people to admit. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Some mornings I sit with my coffee in the early quiet and the silence feels full and peaceful. That is solitude. Loneliness feels like the walls are slowly moving inward. One feeds you, the other quietly starves you. Learn the difference and take it seriously. The third challenge attacks your pride directly. It is learning to receive help. Most people of this generation were taught that strength meant handling things alone. We raised children, worked jobs we sometimes hated, cared for aging parents, survived losses nobody outside our own hearts ever fully knew about. We became very skilled at carrying weight quietly. But somewhere after 70, life starts asking a question that is harder than any of those tasks. Can you let someone help you without feeling ashamed of needing it? I slipped on my kitchen floor one winter morning. Did not break anything, but I sat on that cold floor longer than I want to admit, and my first instinct was not to call anyone. My first instinct was to make sure nobody found out. Even alone on the floor, I was still protecting other people from my own reality. We do not want to become burdens. We do not want our children worrying. We do not want neighbors noticing weakness. But refusing help does not preserve dignity the way we think it does. Sometimes it only delays something worse. I knew a man, retired engineer, completely capable, proud in the way that serves a person well right up until it stops serving them. He refused a walking stick after his balance began to go. Refused to ask his son for help with the yard. Kept saying he was fine. One fall, hospital, 6 months of rehabilitation. He lost nearly all his independence because he waited too long to accept small support when small support was still enough. Asking for help early is not surrender. It is intelligence. Smart aging is not proving you can still do everything alone. Smart aging is preserving your energy for what matters most. And one more thing worth saying. The people who love you often want to help more than you allow them to. When you refuse every offer, you are not protecting them. You are closing a door they were hoping to walk through. The fourth challenge is what I call the body's hesitation. Not weakness exactly. Hesitation, that small pause before getting up from a chair that did not used to be there. That moment at the bottom of a staircase where you briefly calculate whether the trip is worth the effort. The bag of groceries you carried easily for 30 years now feeling slightly heavier than it should. Young people imagine aging arrives like a single dramatic event. It does not. It arrives like fog, slow, quiet, almost polite about the whole thing. I remember standing in my garage one afternoon looking at a ladder I had climbed hundreds of times, and for the first time in my life my body asked a question before I moved. Are we certain about this? That shook me. Not because I could not climb it, because the automatic confidence was simply gone. Here is what I want older people to understand about this. Many times the body does not stop first. The willingness stops first. You avoid one difficult movement, then another, and slowly the body learns to expect a smaller life. That is how people shrink without choosing to. They stop reaching high shelves, stop taking long walks, stop carrying things, and after enough months the muscles accept those instructions. I began fighting this in very small ways. Every morning I walked a little farther than I felt like walking. Some mornings my knees made their opinions known the entire time, but the goal was not athleticism. The goal was a simple, ongoing conversation with my body. I am still here. We are still participating. Older bodies respond far better to consistency than to intensity. You do not need to punish yourself in a gymnasium at 72. You need to keep telling your body, quietly and regularly, that movement is still part of the plan. The fifth challenge is grief that does not finish. By the time you reach your early 70s, almost everyone is carrying invisible absences: a spouse, a sibling, old friends, the places you love that no longer exist in the form you loved them. Restaurants closed, neighborhoods changed beyond recognition, houses sold to people who do not know their history. Sometimes you drive through a street you once knew completely and feel like a stranger to your own memories. This kind of grief is difficult because it stopped arriving dramatically long ago. It became woven into ordinary life. You are making tea and suddenly remember someone who used to sit across from you at this table. You hear a piece of music in a shop and your chest tightens for 10 seconds before you continue with your day as though nothing happened. Younger people often believe grief is something you complete. Older people know better. Grief changes shape. It gets quieter, but it stays. I still catch myself reaching for the phone to call people who have been gone for years. The mind remembers love faster than it remembers reality sometimes. And I think one reason these years feel so emotionally heavy is that older people are grieving almost constantly while presenting a face to the world that suggests otherwise. What helped me was stopping the fight against it. I stopped asking why I could not get past this and started asking a different question. What if remembering is simply part of loving? That one shift changed a great deal for me. Missing someone means they mattered. Feeling the sadness means the heart is still open. The danger comes when grief hardens into withdrawal, when people stop living before life is actually over. Carry your losses with tenderness. Speak the names of the people you loved. Tell the stories. But keep living alongside the grief rather than retreating into it. The sixth challenge is the one that surprises people most. It is the question of purpose after the old roles disappear. For 50 years, you knew who you were because someone needed you. You were the provider, the parent, the colleague, the problem solver, the one people called when something went wrong. Every morning had a function attached to it. Then the children are grown and settled, and the career ends, and the schedules dissolve, and one ordinary morning you wake up, and the question is sitting there waiting: who am I now that nobody particularly needs me to be anything specific? A great many older people become quietly depressed without ever identifying this as the wound underneath everything else. It is not simply aging, it is the loss of identity that was built on role, and roles, when they end, leave a space that can feel frightening if you have never learned to simply be yourself without one. I went through this in the first year after I retired. I kept moving as though I were still busy, filling time with small tasks, pretending it was a long and pleasant holiday. But eventually the holiday emptiness sets in if there is no genuine meaning underneath it. What age taught me, slowly and not always gently, is that perhaps the final chapter is not about being needed by the world every moment. Perhaps it is about finally meeting yourself underneath all the roles you spent decades performing. That takes time and a willingness to sit with uncomfortable quiet. Some people never do it because they stay busy distracting themselves until the end. But if you sit with yourself long enough, you begin finding what still makes you feel alive, not productive, not useful in the old measurable way, alive. Maybe it is a garden. Maybe it is reading history. Maybe it is helping one neighbor feel less invisible. Maybe it is simply learning to enjoy your own company without guilt. There is real wisdom in that last one, more than most people give it credit for. The world teaches young people to build identity through achievement. Old age teaches something quieter and in many ways truer. It teaches identity through presence, through paying attention to what remains rather than measuring only what is gone. The people I have seen age with the most peace are not always the healthiest or the most financially comfortable. They are the people who learn softness without surrender. They stopped fighting reality every morning and began adapting to it with a kind of gentle intelligence. They became kinder to themselves. They stopped measuring their worth by speed and independence alone and started receiving joy in smaller and more honest forms: a cup of coffee made well, a phone call from someone they love, sunlight on a kitchen floor in the morning, a quiet walk before the day gets busy. These things sound unremarkable when you are young. By 70, they have become enormous. So if you are somewhere between 65 and 75 or older than that, I want you to hear this before we finish. You are not failing because life feels heavier now. You are carrying a mind and body that simply require more intention than they once did. That is not weakness. That is what honest aging looks like. There is still curiosity available to you, still connection, still laughter, still purpose. Not in the loud, ambitious way the world rewards when we are young, in a quieter and in some ways truer way. Take the walk today. Make the phone call you have been putting off. Try the unfamiliar thing this week. Let someone help you with something small. Be a little more patient with yourself than you were yesterday. We have all come a long way to get here. Take care of yourselves out there.